Chapter 1. The Cry in the Snow. Snow had been falling for 3 days, and Alara Thorn had learned to walk through it like a ghost, silent, purposeless, alone. She had no destination. The cottage she'd rented at the edge of the Valtara forest was temporary, like everything else in her life. Now, 6 months ago, she'd had a fiancé, a teaching position at the university, and a future that felt solid. Then came the accusation, false, vicious, whispered through faculty halls until her name became synonymous with scandal. The engagement shattered. The position vanished. Even her family had turned away, unwilling to weather the storm of public disgrace. So she'd left the city, left everyone, left herself in a way. Now she walked the forest paths at dusk, wrapped in a wool cloak that smelled of smoke and loneliness. Watching the way light died between the trees, the cry reached her just as the last sliver of sun bled into the horizon. It was faint at first, a thin, desperate wail that didn't belong to any animal she recognized. Alara stopped, her breath misting in the freezing air. The sound came again, sharper now, cutting through the wind like a blade. A child, her heart lurched. She turned toward the sound, boots crunching through snow that had drifted waist-high in places. The forest grew denser here, the trees twisted and ancient, their branches clawing at the darkening sky. She shouldn't be this deep, she knew that. But the crying didn't stop, and something in her, something that still remembered what it felt like to care, pulled her forward. She found the bundle near the base of a massive oak, half buried in snow. It was wrapped in tattered linen, small and trembling. Alara dropped to her knees, her hands shaking as she brushed away the snow. The fabric fell open, and she gasped, a baby. No more than a few months old, pale as marble, with eyes that gleamed unnaturally bright in the dim light. Its cries were weaker now, fading into soft whimpers. Frost clung to its lashes. Oh God, Alara whispered. She scooped the child into her arms, cradling it against her chest. It was impossibly cold, its skin like ice beneath her fingertips. Who would leave you out here? The baby stared up at her, and for a moment, Alara thought she saw something flicker in its gaze, something too knowing, too old. Then it reached out, one tiny hand curling around her wrist. The pain was instant and blinding. Alara screamed. White-hot agony seared through her arm, radiating from the point where the child's fingers touched her skin. She tried to pull away, but the grip was impossibly strong. The world spun, the trees blurred, and then, through the haze of pain, she saw it, a mark, burning itself into her flesh. It was intricate, serpentine, a pattern of interlocking symbols that glowed faintly silver before settling into her skin like a brand. The baby released her, and Alara stumbled backward, gasping, clutching her wrist. The mark remained, stark against her pale skin, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. The child was no longer crying. It lay still in the snow, watching her with those strange, luminous eyes. And then it began to change. The small body twisted, elongated, limbs stretching in ways that defied nature. Alara scrambled back, horror choking her breath. The baby's features blurred, sharpened, reformed into something else entirely, a man. He rose from the snow as though he'd been sleeping there for centuries. Tall and impossibly graceful, dressed in black that seemed to absorb the last of the dying light. His hair was dark, falling just past his shoulders, and his face, God, his face was beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, carved from marble and shadow. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. They were the same eyes the baby had worn, pale gold and ancient, glowing faintly in the gathering darkness. You marked me, Alara breathed, her voice barely audible. The vampire tilted his head, studying her the way a scholar might study an artifact. No, he said softly. His voice was low, accented with something old and foreign. The mark chose you. I merely facilitated. What are you, Lucien Valcour? He took a step toward her, and she flinched. He stopped immediately, something flickering across his face, regret, perhaps, or caution. 10th Lord of House Valcour. And you, Alara Thorn, have just become the most dangerous woman in the immortal world. Her name. He knew her name. How the mark binds you to me, Lucien said, his gaze dropping to her wrist. It's a blood seal, ancient and irreversible, used only in times of war to tie mortal ambassadors to vampire houses. You bear the king's mark now, my mark, which means every house in the eternal courts will hunt you, claim you, or kill you to weaken me. Alara's legs gave out. She sank into the snow, trembling, staring at the silver pattern on her wrist. I didn't agree to this. No, Lucian said quietly. You didn't, but you came when you heard a child crying. You cared when caring had been carved out of you. That compassion, Alara, that's why the mark chose you. I don't want it, her voice cracked. I don't want any of this. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he crouched before her, close enough that she could see the faint lines of grief etched around his eyes, the weariness that no immortal should carry. Neither do I, he admitted. But we don't have a choice anymore. House Dreven has declared war. They know I've sealed Immortal. They'll come for you tonight. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Come with me, Lucian said, extending a hand. Or die here in the snow. Those are your options now. Alara looked at his hand, pale, elegant, deadly. Then at the mark on her wrist, still faintly glowing. Then at the darkening woods, where shadows had begun to move in ways that shadows shouldn't. She took his hand. His skin was cold, but his grip was steady. He pulled her to her feet as the first hall split the night inhuman. Hungry, closing in fast. Run, Lucian whispered, and together, they disappeared into the dark. Chapter 2. Sanctuary of Shadows. They ran until Alara's lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out beneath her. Lucian moved through the forest like liquid shadow, never stumbling, never hesitating. His hand locked around her wrist, the marked one pulling her forward with inhuman strength tempered by surprising gentleness. Behind them, the howls multiplied, echoing through the trees in a chorus that made her blood freeze. What are those things? Alara gasped, her breath coming in ragged clouds. Bloodhounds, Lucian said, without looking back. House Dreven's hunters. They've caught your scent. My scent? I'm just your marked now. Your blood sings to them. He yanked her sharply to the left, down a slope she couldn't see in the darkness. They'll tear you apart to drink it, to break the seal. Alara's foot caught on a root, and she would have fallen if Lucian hadn't caught her, sweeping her against his chest in one fluid motion. For a heartbeat, she was pressed against him, feeling the unnatural stillness where his heartbeat should have been. The cold that radiated from him like winter itself. Hold on, he murmured. Then he was moving faster than should have been possible. Carrying her now, the forest, blurring into streaks of black and white. Alara buried her face against his shoulder, too terrified to scream, too exhausted to protest. The howls grew distant, then faded entirely. When he finally stopped, they were standing before a wall of stone that seemed to rise straight from the earth, ancient, covered in moss and ice, with no visible entrance. Lucian set her down carefully, his hands lingering at her waist for a moment before he stepped back. Can you stand? She nodded, though her legs shook. Where are we? The old Valcour estate. He pressed his palm against the stone, and Alara watched in stunned silence as the wall shimmered, then parted, revealing a narrow passageway lit by torches that burned with blue flame. It's been abandoned for 2 centuries. House Dreven doesn't know it still stands. How reassuring, Alara muttered, but she followed him inside. The passage opened into a vast hall that stole her breath, despite her fear. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow. Crumbling frescoes depicted battles between creatures with fangs and wings, their faces beautiful and terrible. Furniture lay shrouded in dust, elegant even in decay, velvet chaises, mahogany tables, candelabras that might have been silver or might have been bone, Gothic, haunted, magnificent. Lucian moved through it all with the ease of someone walking through his own memory. He lit candles as he passed, filling the hall with warm, flickering light that softened the edges of abandonment. You'll stay here, he said, his voice echoing. The wards are still intact. Nothing can enter without my permission. And what about you? Alara asked, wrapping her arms around herself. The hall was freezing, colder somehow than the forest had been. Lucian paused near a doorway, his back to her. I was wounded in the binding. The daylight ritual. It costs us. I need to rest. For the first time, Alara noticed the way he held himself carefully, as though something hurt. The slight tremor in his fingers, the pallor of his skin which seemed even more pronounced in the candlelight. You're injured, she said. I'm immortal. It will heal. But he swayed slightly, catching himself against the doorframe. Something in Alara's chest twisted, that same cursed compassion that had led her to the crying baby, that had made her reach out when she should have run. Before she could stop herself, she crossed the hall and caught his arm. Lucian stiffened. Don't. You can barely stand. I'm dangerous when I'm weak. His eyes met hers, and she saw hunger there, raw and barely controlled. The mark makes your blood potent. I can smell it. I can hear it moving through your veins. If you touch me right now, where do you need to go? Elara interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then slowly, he gestured down the corridor. The east wing. My chambers. She helped him walk, acutely aware of how cold he was, how his weight grew heavier with each step. The corridor seemed endless, lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow them, pale faces, knowing smiles, the same golden eyes that Lucien wore. Your family? She asked. The ones who survived the purge. His voice was distant, hollow. House Valcour was the largest coven in the Eternal Courts once, 300 strong. Now there's only me. The grief in those words was so vast, so quiet, that Elara's throat tightened. They reached his chambers, a room that was surprisingly Spartan compared to the grandeur of the hall. A massive bed draped in black silk, a desk covered in aged books and maps. Windows shuttered against the coming dawn with iron and velvet. Lucien pulled away from her, moving toward the bed with visible effort. You should go. Choose any room on the west wing. They're dusty but safe. I need you to leave, he said, more sharply now. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands gripping the mattress as though anchoring himself. Please. Elara should have listened, should have fled, but she saw the way his shoulders trembled, the way his jaw clenched against pain. He wouldn't name. What happens if you don't? Feed? The word felt strange on her tongue. Lucien's laugh was bitter. I enter bloodlust. I lose control. I become the monster you're afraid I am. I'm not afraid of you. His head snapped up, eyes blazing. You should be, maybe. Elara moved closer, her heart pounding. But I'm more afraid of those things outside. And you just saved my life. So tell me what you need. The silence stretched between them, taut and trembling. Blood, Lucien finally whispered. I need blood. But I don't feed from the unwilling, ever. It's the only law I haven't broken. Elara looked down at her wrist, at the mark that had bound her to this stranger, this beautiful, broken creature who'd turned her world inside out. What if I'm willing? His expression shattered, shock, longing, denial warring across his features. Elara, just enough, she said quietly. Enough to heal. Then we figure out what comes next. She held out her wrist. Lucien stared at it like she'd offered him salvation and damnation in the same breath. Then slowly, reverently, he took her hand in both of his. Chapter 3. The taste of trust. Lucien's hands trembled as they cradled her wrist. You don't understand what you're offering, he said, his voice rough, strained. His thumb traced the edge of the silver mark, and Elara felt heat bloom beneath his touch, not warmth, exactly, but something deeper, more primal. This isn't like giving blood at a hospital. When we feed, there's pleasure, connection. It's designed that way, to make humans compliant. You'll feel things you don't want to feel, for someone who claims not to manipulate, Elara said, surprised by her own steadiness. You're working very hard to talk me out of this. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips, there and gone. Because once I taste you, everything changes. The mark will deepen. The bond will strengthen. You'll be even more entangled with me than you already are. I'm already hunted by vampires because of a mark I didn't ask for, Elara pointed out. How much more entangled can I get? Lucien closed his eyes, and she saw the war raging behind his expression, hunger versus honor, need versus control. When he opened them again, the gold had brightened, luminous and inhuman. If it becomes too much, he said carefully, if you want me to stop, say my name. Just my name. I'll hear you. Elara nodded, not trusting her voice. He lowered his head, his dark hair falling forward to curtain his face. She felt his breath against her skin, cool, gentle, and then the razor-sharp press of fangs. The pain was brief, a bright sting that made her gasp. Then pleasure rolled through her in waves, warm and liquid and utterly overwhelming. Her knees buckled, but Lucien caught her with his free arm, pulling her down to sit beside him on the bed. His mouth moved against her wrist, drawing blood in slow, measured pulls, and each one sent sparks racing up her arm, into her chest, pooling low in her belly. This was wrong. This should feel wrong. But it did. In single quotes, T.id felt like falling and flying at once. Like every nerve in her body had been sleeping, and was now suddenly, brilliantly awake. She heard herself make a sound, soft, unbidden, and felt Lucien's grip tighten in response. The mark on her wrist flared silver, bright enough to see through his fingers. And then she felt him. Not just the physical sensation, but something deeper. Emotions that weren't hers flooded through the connection-crushing loneliness, centuries of it, wrapped around a core of fierce protectiveness and bone-deep exhaustion. She felt his hunger sating, yes, but also his horror at his own need. His self-loathing for taking from her, his desperate attempt to remain gentle when every instinct screamed at him to take more. More. 200 years alone, she understood suddenly. 200 years of surviving instead of living. Lucien, she whispered. He released her immediately, pulling back so fast he nearly fell. His eyes were wild, pupils blown wide, his lips stained red. He looked young and ancient at once, terrified and awed. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I'm sorry, I didn't want you to stop." The words tumbled out before Alara could think better of them. I felt you. Your loneliness. Is that normal?" Lucien stared at her, then down at the mark on her wrist. The silver had settled into an intricate pattern that seemed to pulse with shared heartbeat, hers racing, his absent. "No," he said quietly. "The king's mark creates a bond, yes, but not like this. Not this deep. Not this fast." He touched her wrist again, feather light, and she felt an echo of that connection spark between them. "You shouldn't be able to feel my emotions. That takes years to develop between a vampire and their." He trailed off, but Alara heard the unspoken word, "consort." Heat flooded her cheeks. We're not, no," Lucien agreed quickly. "No, of course not. But the mark thinks we are, or could be, which means it's strengthening the bond beyond normal parameters." He stood abruptly, putting distance between them, and Alara saw that the tremor in his hands had stopped. His color had improved, still pale, but no longer corpse-like. The wound she'd sensed in him had quieted. "You healed," she observed. "Your blood is." He shook his head, seeming at a loss. "I've never tasted anything like it. The mark makes it potent, yes, but there's something else. Something in you. It's not just life, it's will, stubbornness. You've survived something that should have broken you, and it's in your blood now. That strength." Alara looked away, uncomfortable. "I didn't survive anything. I ran away. You're still here." Lucien's voice was soft but certain. "Still standing. Still choosing compassion over bitterness. That's not running. That's enduring." The words cracked something open in her chest, some wounded place she'd been carefully ignoring for months. Her throat tightened. "Don't," she managed. "Don't be kind to me. I can't." A sound cut through the air, distant but distinct. Breaking glass. Then another. And another. Lucien went utterly still, his head cocked, listening to things she couldn't hear. When he looked at her, his expression had shifted into something cold and predatory. "They've found us," he said. "House Dreven. They've broken through the outer wards." Terror seized Alara's spine. "You said this place was safe." It was. The wards should have held for days. He moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. Unless what? Unless they brought a witch." He turned back to her, and she saw fury in his eyes now, burning beneath the gold. "Blood magic can unravel blood wards given time. I didn't think they'd risk it. Using witches violates the accords. So what do we do?" Lucien crossed to his desk, pulling open drawers with swift efficiency. He withdrew a blade, slender, wickedly sharp, the metal etched with symbols that hurt to look at. "We fight," he said simply. He pressed the blade into her hands. "Iron, the only metal that can truly wound us. If any of them get past me, aim for the heart or throat." Alara's hands shook around the hilt. I can't." "Yes, you can." He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You came for a crying child in a frozen forest. You offered your blood to a monster. You're braver than you know." Alara Thorne. Another crash, closer now. Footsteps in the hall, too many to fast. Lucien released her and moved to the door, his body positioning itself between her and whatever was coming. In the candlelight, he looked like something from the ancient frescoes, beautiful and terrible and utterly lethal. "Stay behind me," he ordered. "No matter what happens." The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Chapter 4. Blood and Ashley came through the doorway like a wave of darkness made flesh. 4 vampires, moving with that same liquid grace Lucien possessed, but there was nothing elegant about their intent. Their eyes burned red, not gold like Lucien's, but crimson, feral, hungry. They wore black leather and silver chains, and their faces were twisted with anticipation. "Lord Valcour," the first one said, his voice mocking. He was tall, angular, with white blonde hair pulled back severely. "How kind of you to make this easy." We expected more. Resistance. Caius. Lucian's voice was ice. House Dreven sends its lapdog. How fitting. Caius smiled, revealing fangs. Lord Dreven sends his regards. And his claim. His gaze slid past Lucian, landing on Alara with predatory interest. The marked human. She smells divine. No wonder you've been hiding. Alara's grip tightened on the iron blade. She's under my protection, Lucian said, his tone deadly calm. Leave now, and I'll let you keep your heads. 1 against 4? Another vampire laughed, female, dark-skinned, beautiful in a cruel way. Your house is gone, Valcor. You have no power here. I have enough. Lucian moved. Alara had seen him run through the forest, had felt his inhuman strength, but nothing prepared her for watching him fight. He was a blur of motion, impossibly fast, impossibly precise. His hand shot out and caught Caius by the throat, slamming him into the wall with enough force to crack stone. The female vampire lunged, and Lucian twisted, using Caius's body as a shield. Her claws raked her own ally instead, but there were too many, the other to rush Lucian from opposite sides. He managed to throw one across the room. The vampire crashed through the desk, scattering books and maps, but the second one landed a hit, claws tearing across Lucian's shoulder. Black blood welled, and Lucian hissed in pain. The female vampire broke free, circling around, her red eyes fixed on Alara. There you are, little mortal, she purred, stalking closer. Let's see what makes your blood so special. Fear locked Alara's muscles. The vampire was between her and Lucian now, cutting off any escape. She raised the iron blade with shaking hands, but she had no idea how to use it. No idea how to fight something that moved like smoke and struck like lightning. The vampire lunged, Alara screamed and swung wildly. By sheer luck, the blade connected, slashing across the vampire's extended arm. The creature shrieked a sound of pure agony and stumbled back. Where the iron had touched, her flesh bubbled and blackened, smoke rising from the wound. You little bitch, the vampire snarled, but the hesitation was enough. Lucian appeared behind her, his arm locking around her throat. There was a sickening crack, and the vampire crumpled, her head at an unnatural angle. Iron to the heart, Lucian said, his voice tight with pain. Only way to be sure. Alara stared at the twitching body, bile rising in her throat. But there was no time for horror. The vampire Lucian had thrown through the desk was rising, shaking off splinters, and Caius had recovered, his face murderous. You'll die for that. Valcor, Caius spat. I've been dying for centuries, Lucian replied. You'll have to do better. They clashed again, a brutal dance of fangs and claws and superhuman speed. Alara pressed herself against the wall, trying to stay out of the way, her eyes searching desperately for something, anything she could do to help. Her gaze landed on the candelabra. It was massive, ornate, and close enough to reach. Without thinking, she grabbed it and hurled it at the vampire, rising from the desk. Ruins. It struck him in the chest, candles scattering, flames catching on the old dry wood of the furniture. Fire bloomed, bright and hungry. The vampire screamed as flames licked up his sleeve. He beat at them frantically, and in his panic, he stumbled backward straight into the spreading fire. No. Caius abandoned his fight with Lucian, rushing toward his burning companion. You idiot. Stop feeding the. But it was too late. The flames had found the ancient tapestries on the walls, the dusty curtains, the wooden beams. The room filled with smoke and heat and the acrid smell of burning vampire. Lucian grabbed Alara's arm. We have to move, now. He pulled her toward the door, but Caius blocked their path, his face twisted with rage and desperation. Behind him, the room was becoming an inferno. You've destroyed everything, Caius hissed at Lucian. Your house, this estate, and now us. You're a plague, Valcor. Then consider this mercy, Lucian said, and kicked him backward into the flames. Caius's scream followed them as they ran. The corridor was filling with smoke. Lucian moved with purpose despite his injuries, pulling Alara through the labyrinth of the estate. Behind them, the fire roared, spreading faster than should have been possible through the ancient structure. The books, Alara gasped, remembering the desk, the maps. Your family's things are already gone, Lucian said, his voice hollow. 200 years of memories. Ash now. They burst into the main hall just as part of the ceiling collapsed, sending a shower of sparks and burning debris crashing down. Lucian shielded her with his body, and she felt the heat sear past them, smelled burning fabric and hair. The main entrance was blocked by flames. The catacombs, Lucian said, changing direction. There's a passage. Something struck him from behind, driving him to his knees. The fourth vampire, the one from the desk, emerged from the smoke, burned and furious, his flesh charred but still moving, still deadly. You don't get to run, he rasped. Alara didn't think. She just moved. She drove the iron blade into his back with all her strength, aiming for where she thought his heart might be. The vampire arched, shrieking, his body convulsing. Black blood sprayed across her hands, burning where it touched, and she screamed, but held on. Pushing the blade deeper, Lucien rose and finished it, his hand plunging through the vampire's chest from the front, meeting her blade in the middle. The creature went still. They stood there, panting, covered in ash and blood. As the estate burned around them, "You saved me," Lucien said, wonder in his voice. "You saved me first," Alara replied. He took her hand, the bloodied, burned one, and pulled her toward a hidden door in the floor. They descended into darkness as the world above them collapsed into flame. Chapter 5. Refuge in ruins. Catacombs swallowed them whole. Alara stumbled down stone steps worn smooth by centuries, her burned hand throbbing, her lungs still choked with smoke. Lucien kept his grip on her other wrist, always the marked one, guiding her through absolute darkness that didn't seem to hinder him at all. Behind them, the sounds of destruction faded to distant rumbles as the estate continued its collapse. "How far down does this go?" Alara asked, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Deep enough." Lucien's tone was flat, emotionless. She couldn't see his face in the darkness, couldn't read what he was feeling, but she remembered the hollowness in his voice when he'd said 200 years of memories. Ash now. The passage leveled out, widening into what felt like a larger chamber. Lucien released her wrist, and she heard him moving, striking something. A torch flared to life, then another, revealing a space that stole her remaining breath. They stood in a circular room carved entirely from white stone, the walls covered in the same intricate symbols that marked her wrist. At the center lay a stone altar draped in faded velvet, and around the perimeter stood stone sarcophagi, each one carved with a face, some peaceful, some anguished, all unmistakably bearing the Valcor features. "Your family," Alara whispered, "the ones who chose to sleep rather than survive the purge." Lucien moved between the tombs like a ghost, his fingers trailing over the carved names. "My sister, Morgana. My brother, Baston. My mother, Serafini. They entombed themselves here 2 centuries ago, waiting for a world that would never return." He stopped before the largest sarcophagus, his hand pressed flat against the stone lid. In the torchlight, Alara could see the full extent of his injuries, the claw marks across his shoulder still seeping black blood, burns on his arms where fire had caught him, ash streaking his face and hair. But worse than the physical wounds was the look in his eyes, devastation, complete and utter loss. "Everything I had left of them was in that estate," he said quietly. "Letters, portraits, my mother's journals, the treaty documents from the peace of houses, gone." Alara's throat tightened. Her own losses felt small suddenly, petty compared to this. She'd lost a job, a relationship, her reputation. He'd lost everything, over and over, for 200 years. "I'm sorry," she said, knowing the words were inadequate. "You have nothing to apologize for." Lucien turned to face her, and she saw him trying to rebuild that wall of cold control, trying to lock the grief away. "You fought. You saved my life. That fire bought us escape. But your home was already a tomb." His voice hardened. "I was living in a graveyard, surrounded by ghosts, pretending the past could be preserved. Maybe it's better this way. Clean, final." He didn't believe that. She could hear the lie in every word, could feel the anguish bleeding through the mark on her wrist, even though he was trying to hide it. "Lucien, let me see your hand." The abrupt change in subject was deliberate, a door slamming shut on vulnerability. But Alara let him take her burned hand in both of his, examining the blistered skin where the vampire's blood had splattered. "Vampire blood is caustic to humans," he said, his tone shifting into something clinical, detached. "It will scar if not treated." He looked around the crypt, then moved to a stone chest against the wall. Inside were bottles, jars, and bundles of dried herb supplies left from when this place had been actively used. He returned with a clay jar filled with something that smelled of mint and copper. "This will hurt," he warned. "Everything hurts," Alara said tiredly. The ghost of a smile crossed his lips. He began spreading the salve over her burns with surprising gentleness, his cold fingers soothing against her inflamed skin. The pain was sharp at first, then faded to a manageable ache. Why do you do that? Elara asked. Do what? Care. Be gentle. You could have just taken what you needed from me. You're stronger, faster. You could have run and left me to those vampires. But you didn't. Lucian was silent for a long moment, his attention seemingly focused on wrapping her hand with clean linen he'd found in the chest. But his jaw was tight, and she could feel something complicated moving through the bond between them. My father, he finally said, was Lord of House Valcour during the height of our power. He was ruthless, believed vampires were superior to humans in every way, that mortals existed only to serve or to feed. When I was young a century ago, give or take, I believed it too. I fed without permission. I took what I wanted. I was a monster in every sense of the word. His hand stilled on her bandaged wrist. Then I met someone. A human woman who worked in our kitchens. She was kind to me, even though she had every reason to hate what I was. She taught me to read human poetry, to see beauty in mortality rather than weakness. I fell in love with her. Elara's heart clenched. What happened? My father found out. He killed her in front of me, to teach me a lesson about attachment to lesser beings. Lucian's voice was ice over rage. That night, I understood what I'd become. What my house had always been. When the purge came, when the other houses united against Valcour's cruelty, I didn't fight. I let them burn us down. I thought I deserved it, but you survived. I survived. He finished tying the bandage and released her hand. And I swore I would never be what my father was. Never take without permission. Never treat humans as things. Never let power corrupt me into cruelty again. He met her eyes, and she saw the weight of 2 centuries of self-imposed penance in his gaze. That's why, he said simply. Elara wanted to reach for him, to offer comfort, but before she could move, his head snapped up, his body going rigid. Someone's coming, he whispered, through the tunnels. Multiple someones, house-driven, no different scent, older. His eyes widened with something that might have been fear. The night court. Elara, we need to. Light blazed at the tunnel entrance, brilliant and cold. Figures emerged, 6 of them, dressed in white and silver, their eyes glowing like stars. The lead figure stepped forward, a woman with hair like moonlight and a face carved from winter itself. Lucian Valcour, she said, her voice echoing with authority. You stand accused of violating the binding laws, the king's mark, given without court approval. The penalty is death. She looked at Elara with eyes that saw too much, for both of you. Chapter 6. The Court of Shadow. Lucian moved in front of Elara instantly, his body a shield between her and the court representatives. Lady Isadora, he said, his voice carefully neutral. The binding laws haven't been invoked in 3 centuries. This is hardly. The laws exist precisely for situations like this. Isadora's pale eyes never left Elara. A king's mark, bestowed without petition to the night court, creates an unsanctioned bond that disrupts the balance between houses. You know this, Lucian. You were there when the laws were written. The mark was necessary, Lucian said. House Dreven declared war. They've been hunting me for months, waiting for weakness. I needed an alliance, yes. We're aware. Isadora gestured, and one of her companions stepped forward, a man with silver streaks in his dark hair, carrying a leather-bound book. We've been tracking House Dreven's movements. Their aggression violates the accords, but your response, marking Immortal without court sanction, violates them as well. So punish me, Lucian said flatly. The mortal is innocent. Release her from the mark and let her go. The mark cannot be released once sealed. Isadora finally looked at Lucian, and Elara saw something like regret in her ancient face. You know that. The bond is permanent until one of you dies. Which brings us to the court's judgment. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel Lucian's tension through the mark, his desperate calculation of odds. He couldn't win. 6 court vampires, all of them older and stronger than him, in a confined space with no escape. Wait, Elara said, stepping out from behind Lucian, despite his attempt to stop her. I don't understand. What are the binding laws exactly? Isadora tilted her head, studying Elara with the detached interest of someone examining an unusual insect. The king's mark was created during the War of Houses, when vampire covens slaughtered each other for territory and power. To end the bloodshed, the Night Court established rules. Any permanent bond between vampire and mortal requires court approval, ensuring the human consents freely and understands the consequences. It prevents forced servitude, unwilling thralls, and the creation of mortal weapons bound to vampire masters. But I do consent, Alara said, the words tumbling out before she could think them through. He didn't force this on me. I chose to help him. You chose to pick up a crying baby in the snow, Isadora corrected. You didn't choose to be marked. The deception, however well-intentioned, violates the spirit of the law. Lucian's hand found Alara's, not the marked wrist this time, but her bandaged one. His grip was gentle but firm, a silent plea for her to stop talking, to stop trying to save him. She ignored it. Then test me, Alara said. Isn't that what the court does? Test whether the bond is coerced or genuine. Isadora's eyebrows rose slightly. You know our procedures? No, but I'm learning quickly. Alara lifted her marked wrist. You said the mark can't be released. That means there must be a way to legitimize it after the fact, or every accidental binding in history would have ended in execution. So test me, whatever you need to do to prove I'm here willingly, for the first time. Isadora smiled, cold but approving. Clever girl. Yes, there is a trial, the ordeal of truth, but it's not pleasant, and most mortals don't survive it intact. What does it involve? The court enters your mind, the silver-haired vampire said, speaking for the first time. His voice was surprisingly gentle. We examine your memories, your emotions, your deepest truths. We see everything, every fear, every shame, every secret you've buried. If we find evidence of coercion or manipulation, the bond is declared invalid and both parties are executed. If we find genuine consent and compatibility, the bond is legitimized and the court's protection is granted. Alara's mouth went dry. Every secret, every shame, the accusations that had destroyed her career, the whispered rumors she'd never been able to escape, the desperate loneliness that had driven her to a cottage in the woods to hide from the world, they would see all of it. No, Lucian said sharply. Absolutely not. I won't let you tear through her mind like scavengers. There has to be another way. There isn't, Isadora said. The law is clear. Either you submit to the ordeal, or you both die here, tonight. Then kill me, Lucian said. Break the mark through my death, and let her go free. The mark doesn't break that way, Isadora replied patiently. When one half of a king's bond dies, the other follows within hours. The magic was designed that way to prevent exactly this kind of sacrifice. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Lucian and saw the same horrified realization dawning on his features. You didn't know, she said. I knew the bond was permanent. I didn't know. He closed his eyes, and she felt his anguish slam through the mark like a physical blow. I didn't know I'd tied your death to mine. God, Alara, I'm so sorry. I'm so stop. Alara squeezed his hand. We don't have time for apologies. How long do we have to decide? The court is generous, Isadora said dryly. You may have until dawn, 3 hours. And if we run, we'll hunt you. The entire night court, every vampire in the eternal realm, will be authorized to kill you on sight. You'd last perhaps a week. Isadora gestured to her companions, and they began to withdraw toward the tunnel entrance. We'll wait above. When you're ready to submit to the ordeal, or when dawn comes, whichever arrives first will return. They vanished like smoke, leaving Lucian and Alara alone in the crypt, surrounded by sleeping Valkors. Lucian pulled away from her, pacing between the sarcophagi, his movements agitated, almost frantic. There has to be a way out, a loophole, something I'm not seeing. Lucian, the old tunnels might extend beyond the court's wards. If we could reach the river before dawn, we could. Lucian, he stopped, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. I'll do it, Alara said quietly. The ordeal. I'll let them in. You don't know what you're offering. Yes, I do. She moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at her. I'm offering the truth, all of it. The ugly parts and the scared parts and the parts I've been running from. If that's what it takes to prove I chose you, then that's what I'll give them. His eyes searched hers, desperate and disbelieving. Why? Because you've been alone for 200 years, Alara said simply. And I know what that feels like. Chapter 7. Truth and trembling. Hours before dawn passed in strange, suspended stillness. Lucian tried to prepare her, pacing the crypt like a caged wolf, explaining what little he knew about the ordeal of truth. But his knowledge was theoretical. He'd never witnessed one. Only heard stories from vampires old enough to remember when the binding laws were enforced regularly. They'll go deep, he said, his voice tight, deeper than conscious memory. Childhood fears, Forgotten moments. The court doesn't just look for evidence of my manipulation, they look for fundamental compatibility. Whether your soul can withstand being bound to something immortal and inhuman. Alara sat on the steps of her mother's Serafini's tomb, watching him. What happens if they decide I can't? Then the bond is declared a mismatch. A cruelty inflicted by nature rather than intention. He stopped pacing, his face bleak. The sentence is the same, death. They consider it mercy. How comforting. Despite everything, Lucian laughed a short, broken sound. You're being remarkably calm about this. I'm terrified, Alara admitted. But I've spent 6 months being afraid of whispers and judgment, and people seeing the worst in me. At least this time, I get to choose what they see. She stood, crossing to where he'd frozen in place. In the torchlight, his face was all sharp angles and shadow, beautiful and otherworldly. The ash had been wiped away, revealing skin like marble, and his golden eyes held something raw, something he was trying desperately to hide. Tell me about her, Alara said softly. The woman you loved, the one your father killed. Lucian flinched. Why? Because if they're going to tear through my mind, they'll tear through yours too. That's how a bond works, isn't it? It goes both ways. So I want to know what they'll find. What you're afraid of. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he moved to the altar, sinking down to sit against its base, suddenly looking every one of his centuries. Her name was Amelie, he said quietly. She was 23, dark hair, dark eyes, laugh like bells. She came from a village we'd destroyed. My father took survivors as servants. She had every reason to hate us, but she didn't. Or maybe she did, and chose kindness anyway. Alara sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. She taught me to see humans as people rather than prey, Lucian continued. Shared her books, her stories, her hope that the world could be better than it was. I was young, barely a century old, and I thought love could change everything. That if I just refused my father's cruelty strongly enough, he'd have to listen. But he didn't. He made me watch. Lucian's voice went flat, emotionless. Drained her slowly, teaching me that attachment was weakness, that caring was vulnerability. He left me with her body and told me to remember the lesson. Alara's throat burned. I'm sorry. I burned the estate down that night. My own home, my own house. I would have burned myself with it. But my mother stopped me, begged me to live, to be better than he was. Then she and my siblings went into the sleep, unable to bear what we'd become. He looked at Alara, his eyes luminous with unshed tears. So, yes, I'm afraid. Afraid the court will see that I've always destroyed everything I touch. That binding you to me is just another version of my father's cruelty. Dressed up in better intentions, Alara took his face in her hands, the burned one and the unmarked one, forcing him to hold her gaze. You didn't bind me, she said firmly. The mark did. You gave me a choice. About the blood, about staying, about all of it. And I'm still choosing you. Not because you've manipulated me or because some magic is forcing me. Because in 2 days, you've shown me more genuine care than anyone has in the past year. Alara, let them see, she said. Let them see everything. Your grief, your guilt, your fear. And they'll see mine to the accusations, the abandonment, the shame. And maybe they'll understand that we're both just broken people trying not to be alone anymore. Lucian closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. Through the mark, she felt the way her words had cracked something open in him. The way hope and terror warred beneath his careful control. You shouldn't have to bare your soul to save me, he whispered. Maybe I'm saving myself too. The words hung between them. True, in ways Alara was only beginning to understand. For 6 months, she'd been hiding, nursing her wounds in isolation, letting shame eat her alive. But shame thrived in darkness, in silence, in secrets. Maybe it was time to drag it into the light. They're coming, Lucian said suddenly, his head tilting. I can hear them descending. Alara's heart kicked against her ribs. Already? It hasn't been 3 hours. You called for us. Isidora's voice echoed through the tunnels before she appeared, her white robe seeming to glow in the torchlight. The mark carries your intent. When you decided to submit, we felt it. The other court members filed in, arranging themselves in a circle around the altar. The silver-haired vampire carried a silver chalice filled with something dark that smelled of copper and nightshade. The ordeal requires blood, Isidora explained. Yours and his, mixed and consumed by the court. It allows us to walk the pathways of your bond, to see the truth of what binds you. She held out a small blade, not iron, but something that glinted like moonlight. Who offers first? Elara stepped forward before Lucian could. I do. Isadora's lips curved in approval. Brave child, give me your marked wrist. Elara extended her arm, trying to keep it steady. The blade was cold against her skin, and the cut was swift, precise. Blood welled, dark red and bright, dripping into the chalice. She felt Lucian's distress through the bond, his instinct to stop this warring with his knowledge that it was their only chance. Now you, Isadora said to Lucian. He came forward, his jaw set. The blade cut his palm, and black blood mixed with red in the chalice, swirling together in patterns that seemed to move of their own accord. The court members each took a sip, their faces going distant, unfocused. Then Isadora looked at Elara with eyes that had gone completely white. Open your mind, she commanded. And let us see. The world tilted, twisted, and Elara fell into memory. Chapter 8. The Weight of Truth. Elara was 12 years old, standing in her mother's kitchen. No, she was 26, in the university hearing room, facing a panel of stone-faced administrators. No, she was in the snow, reaching for a crying baby, with eyes too old and knowing. The memories crashed over her in waves, out of order, each one sharp and vivid as broken glass. The court moved through her mind like water, flowing between moments, examining every corner she'd tried to seal away. Miss Thorne, these accusations are quite serious. The dean's voice, cold and final. Multiple students have reported inappropriate conduct. The evidence suggests I didn't do anything wrong. Her own voice, desperate, younger. Professor Hadley is lying. He made advances, I rejected him, and now he's Professor Hadley is a respected member of this faculty. Your word alone, against his reputation. The court saw it all. Her innocence, Hadley's rage at being refused, the carefully constructed lies, the way her colleagues had turned away, unwilling to risk their own positions by defending her, the whispers that followed her everywhere, inappropriate, unprofessional, predatory, words that should have described her accuser, not her. She felt the court's presence, 6 ancient consciousnesses moving through her shame like surgeons through flesh. They didn't judge. They simply observed, cataloging every emotion, every wound. We don't want you here anymore, her mother said, the memory 3 months old and still raw. You've brought disgrace to this family. Whatever you did or didn't do, the damage is done. People talk, Elara, and we can't afford to be associated with that kind of scandal. I'm your daughter. You were. The loneliness after that had been absolute. No job, no family, no friends willing to risk contamination by association. Just Elara and her shame, packed into a cottage at the edge of the world, trying to become invisible. The court moved deeper. They found the moment she'd heard the baby crying and almost kept walking. The exhaustion that had made her think, what does it matter? What does anything matter? Then the small, stubborn part of her that refused to let cruelty win, that forced her feet to turn toward the sound. They found the terror when Lucian had transformed, the mark burning into her skin, the choice to take his hand instead of dying in the snow. And they found something else. Something Elara hadn't fully acknowledged, even to herself. Relief. Relief that someone finally needed her. That she had purpose again, even if that purpose was survival. Relief that Lucian looked at her without judgment, without preconceptions, without seeing the stain of false accusations. She was lonely. She felt the court conclude. Wounded. Vulnerable. Yes, Elara thought back, but not coerced, not manipulated, just human. The perspective shifted. Now she was inside Lucian's memories, seeing through his eyes, feeling his emotions like they were her own. The court had turned their attention to him, and Elara was caught in the current, pulled along as they excavated his truth. She saw Emily through his eyes, vivid, bright, impossibly kind, felt his young love, so certain it could change the world. Then his father's hands around Emily's throat, draining her slowly, and Lucian, held by guards, forced to watch, screaming until his voice broke. The guilt that followed was crushing. I brought her into this house. I exposed her to him. I killed her by loving her. 200 years of that guilt, carried like stones. She saw him during the purge, standing in the burning ruins of House Valcour, letting the other houses hunt his family because he believed they deserved it. His mother's final words, live, Lucian, be better than we were. 2 centuries of trying, of refusing to feed without permission, of helping humans in secret, protecting them from other vampires, atoning for sins that could never be fully paid. She saw the moment he'd chosen to use the king's mark. House Dreven closing in, months of running, growing weaker. The desperate calculation. I need an ally. Someone bound to me, who has to survive if I survive. Someone I can protect. And then the crying baby, and Alara's approach, and Lucian thinking, not her. Anyone but her. She's already wounded. This will destroy what's left. But the mark had chosen anyway. She felt his horror when the seal completed. His anguish when he realized what he'd done, bound another innocent woman to himself, to danger, to a fate she hadn't asked for. I'm my father, she felt him think. Taking what I need, regardless of the cost to others. No, Alara wanted to shout. No, you're not. You gave me choices. You've protected me. But the court wasn't finished. They dove deeper, into the spaces where the bond had formed, into the connection that pulls between Alara and Lucian like a shared heartbeat. They examined it from every angle, the magic that had sealed them together, the compatibility that had allowed it to take root so quickly, so deeply. Alara felt them testing the bond's strength, its authenticity, whether it was built on coercion or something more genuine, and she felt the moment they found their answer, the bond was real. Forged in crisis, yes, but sustained by choice, by Lucian's careful respect for her autonomy, by Alara's decision to stay, to help, to fight alongside him, by the recognition in both of them of someone who understood what it meant to be alone, to carry shame, to survive when survival felt impossible, compatible. She felt the court conclude. Unexpectedly so, the memories released her. Alara gasped, suddenly back in her own body in the crypt, surrounded by the court. She was on her knees, trembling, tears streaming down her face. Lucian was beside her in the same position, his hands still bleeding into the chalice, his eyes wide and shocked. They'd seen everything. All of it. Every secret, every shame, every broken piece. Isadora's eyes faded from white back to pale blue. She looked between Alara and Lucian with an expression that might have been sympathy. The ordeal is complete, she said. The court has reached a verdict. Alara's heart stopped. The bond is legitimate, Isadora continued. Forged without proper protocol, yes, but born of genuine need and sustained by authentic choice. Both parties have suffered coercion in their past, not from each other, but from a world that failed to protect them. The mark recognized that shared wound and offered healing through connection. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. However, Alara's blood turned to ice. The bond is incomplete, Isadora said. The king's mark requires a final seal, a conscious, witness declaration of commitment from both parties. Without it, the bond remains vulnerable. House Dreven or any other faction could still attempt to break it through blood magic or assassination. What kind of declaration? Lucian asked, his voice hoarse. Isadora smiled, cold and knowing. A vow. Made before the night court, binding you together, not just through magic, but through choice, witnessed and sanctioned by the oldest laws. She looked at Alara. Essentially, child, you must marry him. Chapter 9. The vow of blood and starlight word hung in the air like a sword suspended by thread. Marry. Alara stared at Isadora, certain she'd misheard. That's not vampires don't we do actually, the silver-haired court member said gently. The old way. Blood vows witnessed under starlight, binding to souls until one returns to dust. It's how the king's mark was always meant to be completed. A political alliance, yes, but one chosen freely by both parties. This is archaic, Lucian said, his voice sharp with barely controlled panic. The vow tradition hasn't been practiced in for 100 years. Even during the War of Houses, it was rare because it's permanent, Isadora interrupted. Because, unlike human marriages with their divorces and annulments, a vampire blood vow cannot be broken. Not by time, not by distance, not even by death. Your souls remain entwined across whatever comes after. She looked at Alara with something approaching gentleness. This is not a small thing we're asking. A human who takes the blood vow ages normally but remains bound to their vampire partner. When death comes for you, he will feel it like losing half his soul. Many vampires go mad from that grief. Some choose to follow their mortal partner into death. Others endure centuries of mourning. So you're asking her to condemn me, Lucian said bitterly. Bind herself to me, knowing she's sentencing me to watching her die. We're asking her to choose, Isadora corrected. As we're asking you. The vow requires mutual consent, spoken aloud, with full understanding of the consequences. You both have until dawn to decide. And if we refuse? Elara asked. Then the bond remains incomplete and vulnerable. House Dreven will continue hunting you. Other factions will see opportunity in your weakness. You'll spend however long you both survive, looking over your shoulders, waiting for the knife in the dark. Isidora's expression was implacable. The vow grants you the Night Court's full protection. Our resources, our ancient authority, our guarantee that no house may touch you without answering to us. It's not a perfect solution, but it's the only one the law allows. The court members withdrew again, melting into shadows, leaving Elara and Lucian alone with an impossible choice. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Lucian laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. This is insane. 2 days ago, you didn't know vampires existed. Now we're discussing eternal soul bonds like they're business contracts. It is a business contract, Elara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Isn't it? That's what the King's Mark was designed for. Political alliances. Protection through binding, yes. But Lucian ran his hands through his hair, agitated. Elara, do you understand what they're asking? It's not just a ceremony. The vow changes you, binds you to me on a level even deeper than the mark. You'd feel everything I feel. My hunger, my darkness, my centuries of. He stopped, his face stricken. I've already taken too much from you. I won't take this too. What if I want to give it? You don't know what you're saying. Then explain it to me. Elara moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to look at her. Tell me exactly what this vow means. What I'd be choosing. Lucian's jaw worked, emotions warring across his face. Finally he spoke, his voice low and careful. The blood vow creates a permanent psychic bond. You'd feel my presence always, even across distance. My emotions would bleed into yours and vice versa. In moments of strong feeling, fear, joy, pain, the connection intensifies. You'd essentially never be alone again. He paused. For someone who's been lonely as long as you have, that might sound appealing. But it also means never having privacy. Never being able to hide your thoughts or feelings from me. It's intimate, profoundly so. And when I die? Elara asked quietly. I'll feel it happening. The bond breaking. It's described as, he swallowed hard, like being torn in half. Most vampires who lose their vowed partners either follow them within days or spend the next century in a kind of living death. Mindless, broken. So you're afraid, terrified, he admitted. Losing Emily nearly destroyed me, and I only knew her for a year. If I bind myself to you, truly bind myself, and then lose you to time or violence or simple mortal fragility, his voice cracked. I don't think I'd survive it. Not intact. Elara felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. Then why is the court insisting on this? If it's so dangerous because completed bonds are nearly impossible to break, Lucian said. House Dreven couldn't touch you. No vampire could, without declaring war on me and the Night Court simultaneously. You'd be safer than almost any mortal alive, but you'd be vulnerable. I was already vulnerable the moment I marked you. The truth of that settled between them. Heavy and undeniable, Elara looked down at her wrist, at the silver mark that had changed everything. She thought about the past 6 months, the crushing isolation, the shame that had eaten her alive, the slow erasure of herself until she'd become almost invisible. Then she thought about the past 2 days, fighting beside Lucian, feeling his grief and his strength, being seen, truly seen for the first time in so long. What do you want? She asked him. Not what you think is right, or noble, or self-sacrificing. What do you actually want? Lucian closed his eyes, and through the mark, she felt the truth he was trying so hard to hide. He wanted her, wanted the bond, wanted to not be alone anymore, to have someone who understood, who chose him despite knowing what he was. But his guilt, ancient, crushing, wouldn't let him say it. I want you to be safe, he said finally. Free, living whatever life you would have lived if I hadn't dragged you into this nightmare. That life was killing me, Elara said bluntly, slowly, quietly, but killing me all the same. At least this nightmare has purpose. Elara, I'm not saying yes, she interrupted. Not yet, but I'm not saying no either. I need to think. We both do. She turned away, moving to the far side of the crypt, needing space to breathe, to process. Behind her, she heard Lucian sink down against the altar again, his exhaustion and turmoil palpable through the bond. The torches flickered, casting dancing shadows across the sleeping Valcours. Elara stared at Serafini's tomb. at the carved face, so like Lucien's, and wondered what his mother would think of this. Whether she'd approve of her son binding himself to another mortal woman, risking another devastating loss, or whether she'd understand that sometimes love in whatever form it took was worth the risk of grief. Is that what this is? Alara wondered. Love? No, not yet. It was too soon, too tangled in crisis and magic and forced proximity, but it could become love. She could feel that possibility in the bond, in the way Lucien looked at her, in the fierce protectiveness and careful respect he'd shown since the beginning. The question was whether potential was enough to justify a vow that would last beyond death. Dawn was coming, and with it, a choice that would define the rest of her life, however long that life might be. Chapter 10. Partnership over possession. First hint of dawn crept through cracks in the stone ceiling. Pale and unwelcome, Alara had spent the remaining hours watching the light change, thinking about everything and nothing, her mind circling the same impossible questions. Across the crypt, Lucien had been equally silent, both of them lost in their own deliberations. Now time had run out, footsteps echoed in the tunnel. The night court returned, their white robes seeming to glow in the dim pre-dawn light. Isadora's expression was unreadable as she surveyed them. Dawn breaks, she said simply. Have you decided? Alara stood, her legs stiff from sitting. She looked at Lucien, who had risen as well, his face drawn but composed. Through the mark, she felt his resignation. He'd decided to refuse the vow, to accept whatever consequences came, rather than bind her to a fate he considered cruel, noble, self-sacrificing, infuriating. I have conditions, Alara said. Isadora's eyebrows rose. Conditions? For the vow. If I agree, I want things established, clearly, so everyone understands what this bond is and isn't. Lucien stared at her, shock rippling through their connection. Alara, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, she interrupted. That's the point. This is my choice, but I'm making it on my terms. She turned to face the court fully, lifting her chin despite the fear hammering in her chest. First condition. This is a partnership, not ownership. I'm not his possession, not his property, not his human pet. Whatever this vow creates, it has to respect my autonomy. The blood vow has always been between equals, the silver-haired vampire said gently. It creates unity, not hierarchy. Good. Second condition. I want to understand the immortality question. If she hesitated, the word catching in her throat, if someday I choose to become what he is, I want that to be possible. Not required, not expected, but possible. Lucien made a choked sound. You can't be serious. The transformation is agony, and there's no guarantee. I said possible, not definite. I want the option. Alara held his gaze. You're asking me to bind myself to you, knowing you'll watch me die. The least you can offer is the choice to not die if I decide I'm not ready when the time comes. Isadora tilted her head, considering. The transformation is permitted under the vow, yes, though typically attempted only after decades of bonding, when the human fully understands what they're choosing. Third condition, Alara continued, her voice gaining strength. The vow protects me from other vampires. But what protects me from him? The crypt went very still. I would never. Lucien started, wounded. I know, Alara said, her tone gentler. I know you wouldn't, not intentionally. But you're stronger than me, faster, immortal. The power imbalance is enormous. So I want a failsafe, something in the vow that ensures if you ever lose control, if bloodlust or madness or centuries of grief break you, there's a way for me to sever the bond and survive. Such failsafes don't traditionally exist, Isadora said, but there was approval in her voice. The vow is meant to be permanent, then make it untraditional. You're the Night Court. You wrote the laws. Surely you can modify them for special circumstances. Isadora exchanged glances with her fellow court members. Silent communication passed between them, too quick for Alara to follow. We could build in a severance clause, one of them said slowly. Activated only under specific conditions. Proven harm, complete loss of sanity, violation of the core tenets. It would weaken the bond's protective properties somewhat, but it would give the human actual power in the relationship. Another finished. Not just the illusion of it. I like this mortal, the silver-haired vampire said, smiling. Isadora turned back to Alara, her expression thoughtful. You negotiate like someone who's been powerless and refuses to be again. It's refreshing. Most humans presented with the vow are too overwhelmed to think clearly. I've had a very educational 2 days, Alara said dryly. Very well. Your conditions are acceptable, with one addition of our own. Isidora's gaze sharpened. The vow once spoken requires ongoing consent to maintain its full strength. Every decade, you must reaffirm your choice before the court. If either party refuses, the bond loosens, still present, but no longer carrying the full weight of protection or connection. Think of it as a renewable contract. Every decade? Lucian's voice was strained. That's not how blood vows work. They're eternal by nature. We're creating a new model, Isidora said, for a new kind of bond, one that acknowledges mortal lifespans and the reality of change. If your partnership is as strong as you both seem to think, the reaffirmations will be a formality. If circumstances shift, you both have an exit that doesn't require death. She looked at Alara. Does this satisfy your need for autonomy? Alara nodded slowly, her mind racing through implications. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about this situation was perfect, but it was better than blind permanence. Better than trapping herself in a bond she might grow to resent. And you? Isidora turned to Lucian. Will you accept a vow that can be unmade? That requires her to actively choose you, again and again, rather than being locked in place by magic? Lucian looked at Alara, his expression raw. Through the mark, she felt his fear of loss, of rejection, of being chosen and then unchosen. But underneath that fear was something else. Relief. Yes, he said quietly. I accept her conditions. All of them. Then we have an agreement. Isidora gestured, and the other court members moved to form a circle around Alara and Lucian. The vow must be spoken under open sky, with starlight as witness. We'll move to the surface. They climbed from the catacombs as dawn broke, fully, emerging into a world transformed. The Valcour estate was gone, reduced to smoking ruins. But beyond the destruction, the forest stretched endless and beautiful, and above them, a few persistent stars still glimmered against the lightening sky. Isidora positioned Alara and Lucian facing each other, then drew a blade across her own palm. She painted symbols on their foreheads with her blood-old signs that tingled against Alara's skin. Speak the words, Isidora commanded, and bind yourselves by choice, witnessed by the oldest powers. Lucian took Alara's hands, both of them, the marked and unmarked, holding them like they were precious. I vow myself to you, he said, his voice steady despite the tremor she felt through their bond. Not as master, but as partner, not to possess, but to protect. I offer you my strength, my loyalty, my truth, for as long as you'll have me, for as long as you choose me. The words wrapped around them like light. Now it was Alara's turn. She looked into those ancient gold eyes and saw past the vampire, past the lord of a fallen house, to the man who'd been alone for 200 years, who'd carried impossible guilt and still chosen gentleness, who'd given her choices when he could have taken everything. I vow myself to you, she said, and meant it. Not as possession, but as partner. Not because magic demands it, but because I choose it. I offer you my trust, my truth, my choice made freely, made now, and made again whenever you need to hear it. For as long as this serves us both, for as long as we choose each other. The bond flared between them, silver and gold, brighter than starlight, and the vow was sealed. Chapter 11. Aftermath and beginning. The bond settled into Alara's chest like a second heartbeat. It wasn't painful, but it was present in a way the mark had never been. She could feel Lucian's relief flooding through the connection, mixed with wonder and a kind of cautious hope. He was trying desperately not to trust. When she swayed slightly from the intensity, he caught her immediately, his arms steady and cool. I have you, he murmured. I know, she thought, and felt him hear it through the bond. His eyes widened. The vow opens the pathway fully, Isidora explained, watching them with clinical interest. Your thoughts aren't shared automatically. You each maintain privacy, but direct communication is possible when desired. You'll learn to modulate it with practice. How long does it usually take to learn control? Alara asked, still leaning against Lucian, not quite ready to step away from the steadiness he offered. Months, sometimes years. Isidora smiled slightly. You'll likely broadcast your emotions quite loudly to each other until you develop filters. I suggest patience. Noted, Lucian said dryly. Through the bond, Alara felt his amusement mixing with lingering anxiety. The silver-haired vampire stepped forward, producing a scroll sealed with wax. The court's formal recognition of your bond. This grants you protected status within all vampire territories and obligates us to defend you should House Dreven or any other faction attempt retaliation. What about House Dreven? Alara asked. They're just going to accept this? They'll have no choice. Isidora's voice turned cold. We'll deliver notice of your bonding within the hour. Any aggression against you now constitutes an act of war against the Night Court itself. Lord Dreven is ambitious, not suicidal. He'll withdraw his hunters and redirect his attention elsewhere. Just like that? Elara couldn't quite believe it could be so simple. Just like that. The laws exist for a reason to prevent the chaos that consumed us during the War of Houses. Dreven may hate it, but he'll comply. Isidora paused. Of course, political retaliation is still possible. Economic pressure, social ostracism, minor provocations that don't technically violate the accords. You should expect House Valcour's already damaged reputation to suffer further. House Valcour is just me now, Lucian said quietly. There's no reputation left to damage. Not quite. Isidora gestured to the ruins behind them. The estate is destroyed, yes, but you still hold legal claim to Valcour territories, titles, and resources. Centuries of accumulated wealth don't simply vanish because a building burns. You're still a lord of the eternal courts, Lucian. More importantly, you're no longer alone. She looked at Alara. A bonded lord carries more weight than a solitary one. The court will expect you both to rebuild not the estate, perhaps, but House Valcour's standing. Take a seat at the Night Council. Participate in governance. I don't want Lucian started. What you want is irrelevant to what's needed. Isidora's tone brooked no argument. The balance of power among houses has been unstable since Valcour fell. Dreven has been expanding unchecked. Your return, bonded and court-sanctioned, changes the equation. Use it. With that, the Night Court departed, dissolving into morning shadows, leaving Ilara and Lucian standing in the ruins of his family's legacy. The silence felt enormous. Well, Ilara said finally, that was insane, terrifying, completely unprecedented. Lucian offered. He'd released her when the court left, putting careful distance between them. And she could feel his uncertainty through the bond, like he wasn't sure what they were to each other now. How to act, what was expected. I was going to say binding, Alar said, and felt his startled laugh echo through their connection before. He made the sound aloud. That was terrible. I have a feeling I'm going to make a lot of vampire puns until the novelty wears off. It won't, but he was smiling now, some of the tension bleeding from his shoulders. Vampires take ourselves far too seriously. It's refreshing to have someone who doesn't. Alara looked around at the smoking ruins, at the forest beyond, at the dawn that Lucian could now stand in barely thanks to the vow's protective properties strengthening his resilience. So what do we do now? The court expects us to rebuild a house, but I don't know the first thing about vampire politics. Neither do I really. I've been avoiding court life for 2 centuries. Lucian moved through the ruins, his expression distant. But Isidora's right. Dreven won't stop being a threat just because he can't attack us directly. He'll find other ways to cause damage. Then we need allies. Other houses that would benefit from checking Dreven's power. That's actually strategic thinking. Lucian looked at her with something like respect. But alliances require something to offer in return. We have a name and not much else. We have me, Alara pointed out. A human bonded to a vampire lord. That's unprecedented in the modern era, right? That has to be worth something politically. It makes you a target, Lucian said, his voice tight. Every house looking to curry favor or gain leverage will have to go through the Night Court to get to me. Which means they'll have to approach us properly, with proposals and negotiations, like civilized beings. Alara crossed her arms. You're thinking of me as a vulnerability. What if I'm an asset instead? Through the bond, she felt his instinctive rejection of that idea, not because he didn't value her, but because thinking of her as a political piece felt too close to objectification. To his father's mindset of using humans as tools, not a tool, Alara said gently, catching his thought. A partner, remember? That was the whole point of the conditions. I'm offering to be actively involved in whatever comes next, not a decorative mortal you keep tucked away for safety. Lucian was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with something internal. Finally, he said, I've spent 200 years trying not to be my father. It's made me overcautious in the opposite direction, refusing to use any power, any influence, because I'm afraid it will corrupt me. And And maybe that's its own kind of cowardice. He met her eyes. You're right. If we're going to survive what's coming, really survive, not just hide, we need to engage. Build something worth protecting. So where do we start? The Valcour estate in the city. It's smaller, more defensible, and I still have the keys. A wry smile crossed his face. If it hasn't been looted in my absence. And then we request an audience with the Night Council. Formally announce our bonding, make our presence known. Start identifying which houses might be open to alliance. He paused. It won't be easy. Most of the court remembers what House Valcour was. They won't trust us quickly. Good thing we have time then. Alara held out her hand. Shall we? Lucian stared at her outstretched hand, and through the bond, she felt the moment something shifted in him. The last of his resistance crumbling, replaced by tentative acceptance of the partnership they'd forged. He took her hand. Lacing their fingers together, marked wrist to unmarked palm. Together, he said quietly. Together. Alara agreed. They walked away from the ruins as the sun climbed higher. Two figures bound by choice and magic and the fragile hope that broken things could be rebuilt into something stronger. Behind them, in the catacombs beneath the burning estate, the sleeping Valcours remained in their stone tombs, waiting for a world that would never return. But above ground, in the light of a new day, House Valcour had begun again. The end epilogue. 6 months Laturth Valcour city estate gleamed with candlelight. Alara stood in the receiving hall, dressed in deep blue velvet that felt both strange and right against her skin. Watching vampires arrive for the first official gathering House Valcour had hosted in 200 years. They came in pairs and trios, ancient faces, wearing careful neutrality. Their eyes cataloging everything, the restored tapestries, the polished floors. The human woman standing beside Lord Valcour like she belonged there. Nervous? Lucian murmured, his hand finding the small of her back. Terrified, Alara sent back through their bond, but smiled for their guests. Aren't you? Constantly. But I have you. The declaration still caught her off guard sometimes, the casual intimacy of it. 6 months of shared thoughts, shared space, shared purpose, and she was still learning how to navigate the depth of their connection. Still learning him, his grief, his humor, his unexpected joy in small mortal pleasures like coffee and rainstorms. Still learning herself in relation to him. Lord Valcour, a vampire, approached, elegant, dark-skinned, eyes like amber. Lady Thorne, thank you for the invitation. Lady Ashima, Lucian greeted. Your presence honors us. Politics, alliances, the slow work of rebuilding trust and influence. It was exhausting and exhilarating, and nothing like the quiet despair Alara had felt 6 months ago in a cottage at the edge of the world. As the gathering swelled and conversation filled the hall, Alara caught Lucian's eye across the room. He smiled, small, private, meant only for her, and she felt his contentment through the bond. Not happiness, not yet. They'd both been broken too badly for easy healing, but contentment, purpose, partnership, and the possibility, growing stronger with each passing day, that this strange, impossible bond might become something beautiful. Choose me again? Lucian's thought was tentative, still uncertain even after 6 months. Every day, Alara sent back. For as long as you'll have me, forever then. She laughed silently, the sound echoing through their bond. Forever's a long time for a mortal. Then I'll make it worth your while. And surrounded by vampires and candlelight and the weight of futures unwritten, Alara chose to believe him.